As the Carolina Panthers season winds down and we inevitably head towards a top 5 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, there are a few positives that can be extrapolated from this otherwise lost season, two of which being our young wide receivers Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker. So in this video, I'm going to compare these two guys in terms of how they performed and their preseason expectations before the season began, and we're going to get into all of that right after this.
I'm from the foe, you dig?
Welcome to The Way I See It with Jamario Rashad. This is a Carolina Panthers fan channel. Please do me a favor by hitting the like button, and please make sure you subscribe as I am on my road to 3K, trying to make sure my channel continues to grow as this season winds down. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the video. So today, I want to discuss whether or not this little situation that the Carolina Panthers find themselves in is a good or bad problem to have. So what is that problem? I know a lot of you may ask. So the Carolina Panthers drafted Xavier Legette with the final pick in the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft, actually trading into the first round as we did not have a first round pick, as we traded this year's first round pick to the Bears for Bryce Young. So we had to trade into the first round using even more draft capital to ensure that we got Xavier Legette. Now, Xavier Legette in no way has been terrible. He hasn't been in any way, shape, or form a bust. But when you look at somebody that you trade into the first round for, one can only assume that you think that this guy is going to be somebody that comes in and has an immediate impact and could possibly be a star the moment that he walks on the field. Now, so far, that has not been the case, but there has been another young wide receiver that the Carolina Panthers got this season, and he wasn't even drafted, that being undrafted wide receiver out of Holy Cross, Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker, in comparison to Xavier Legette, has significantly outplayed him on a game-to-game basis as well as a snap-to-snap basis. And a question that's fair to ask is this a good sign for the Panthers or a bad sign for the Panthers? So before we get into the positives and the negatives of this somewhat incongruence, let's call it, I'm going to give you a little more context into just how these two guys have performed. So first, let's just talk about the fact that we have three total guys, one of which we're not going to be discussing much in this video, being JT Sanders, in the top 13 in terms of receiving yards for pass catchers drafted in the 2024 draft. At number 9, we have our first round pick, Xavier Legette, and right there at 11, we have our undrafted rookie, Jalen Coker, right there at 11. So Xavier Legette has played and appeared in 14 total games, and you juxtapose that to Jalen Coker, who just completed his 8th game Sunday. When you look at their stats, it would one could only surmise that if Jalen Coker was allowed to have the opportunity, the snaps, and the games played that Xavier Legette has had, that he would significantly outplay him, be it that he's only a little bit less than 100 yards behind him and has only scored 2 less touchdowns. To dive into the numbers just a little bit deeper, Jalen Coker, as I mentioned, has only played in 6 less games, but in terms of snaps, he's played 349 less snaps than Xavier Legette. He's had 20 less targets, but he only has 66 less yards and 2 less touchdowns, as I mentioned. Now, the separation between these two is shown drastically when you look at the per game numbers. Now, Jalen Coker averages more yards per reception as well as more yards per game. Now, everything is not in a vacuum, and of course, this is just projecting out, and this is not saying that this is how it would have went. But when you take Jalen Coker's per game numbers, if you were to extrapolate that out over a 17-game sample with what he was able to do with his limited sample size just there, Jalen Coker would have ended the season with 793 yards on just 3 targets per game. That is absolute madness. That has star potential written all over it. And this is a guy that we got as an undrafted free agent, a priority guy, but he is somebody that we made sure made the initial 53. Although he did get cut, he passed through all waivers. We got him back. Luckily, because we see that this guy should have been drafted in the top 2 or 3 rounds of the draft with the way that he's performed. This is somebody that has booming potential and has a budding future here with the Carolina Panthers. So now that we see just how Jalen Coker has just totally outperformed Xavier Legette in terms of stats on a game-to-game basis, which makes us just surmise that he would be a better wide receiver if given the same opportunity as Xavier Legette. But their draft position would in no way, shape, or form in any year or sport dictate that to happen. So we know that's not going to happen. Let's talk about some of the positives that this occurring may. What are the positives of Jalen Coker playing this well? What are some of those positives, man? So firstly, I have to acknowledge that this is an absolute win for Dan Morgan and the college scouts that are currently employed by the Carolina Panthers. Under our previous regime and GM Scott Fitterer, we have entire draft classes that are no longer with this team. But usually after you got past the 3rd round, those guys wouldn't stick on the team for more than a season or so, and some of those guys wouldn't even make the team whatsoever. So with Dan Morgan and the guys that he's brought in the scouting department, finding somebody that's an absolute gem in undrafted free agency in the first year of their tenure with the Carolina Panthers, that is an absolute win for this team, and it shows that he does have the ability to build out this roster. If it's not, even if it's not with just top end talent or perceived top end prospects, he still has the ability, or they still have the ability, to find diamonds in the rough, which is completely positive and a good sign for the Carolina Panthers' future. Now, the next thing that we have to talk about is the fact that Jalen Coker, being an undrafted free agent, was only signed to and this is just me going off memory, and I could be wrong, but I know it's low. I believe it's only about a $250,000 contract, probably totally guaranteed to come in and do what he's been able to do as an undrafted free agent and be as good as he's been. What that allows for the Carolina Panthers to do is go ahead and immediately pay him now and have a player that has upper tier to star level potential. We can pay him after a 1-year pretty good rookie season. We can give him a multi-year deal and have a cost-controlled guy that could potentially be a star over the next few years. Have him cost-controlled and basically for pennies compared to what somebody that is drafted in the top 1 to 4 rounds would command after their initial rookie contract is up. We can go ahead and pay him now and have that level of player locked down with Bryce Young, still have the ability to go out there and add more pieces without actually giving draft capital to it, which brings me to my final point: is finding diamonds in the rough like this in Jalen Coker allows for Dan Morgan and the scouts to go out there and almost exclusively focus next year's draft on defense, which is what this team honestly needs the most. Anybody will be able to point out, and I'm pretty sure that the easiest target and the lowest hanging fruit for people to talk about when it comes to the Carolina Panthers is Bryce Young this, Bryce Young that. If you actually watch the games, you will see that the defense was just as bad, if not a lot worse, than Bryce Young has been this season, and that does primarily need to be the focus of what needs to be fixed in this offseason. So with Jalen Coker being able to take up a roster spot next year, and us assuming, which we could credibly assume, that he is going to improve after this rookie year, getting his feet wet for a year in the NFL, one can only assume that he's going to be even better next year after playing this well, after not even playing FBS ball for 5 years in college. Come on, he is going to be an absolute baller. So we can focus on the defense, and that allows for us to have hopefully even more wins in the 2025 draft, man. But those are just a few positives. Excuse me, that I see. Mouth getting dry. I need some water. I don't got none. Those are just a few positives that I see in terms of Jalen Coker being this much better at this current time than Xavier Legette, man. But as you know, of course, it's easy to mention the positives, but the hard things to talk about are the negatives, man. So what are the negative aspects that I believe are fair for people to to give into the narratives of, or for individuals to believe? Now, a few of those things are: under no circumstance should a guy drafted in the first round be outperformed by an undrafted guy. There's just under no scenario should that happen. I don't even care if you draft Antonio Brown. I mean, if you get Antonio Brown in undrafted free agency, with the favoritism that is shown to guys that teams have actually invested draft capital into. You could even see it in their target shares, with Xavier Legette getting 30, 40, like so many more targets than Jalen Coker, with the coaches pretty much having the same tape and seeing the same games that we do. You know that these upper round guys get favoritism. So under no circumstance should an undrafted guy even be comparable to him in terms of his performance. So if I am going to give Dan Morgan and the coaching and the scouting department kudos for their ability to find gems in the late round, I have to say that finding somebody that is it's clear to me, and I believe it's become clear to a lot of people, yes, not even 1 year into it, that this first round guy that we drafted does not have wide receiver one potential. That's not to say that he can't be good. That's not to say that he, whatever. Xavier Legette is not going to be a wide receiver one. That's just not, he doesn't have that skill set, and he's left the door open for, even though I believe that we probably will primarily go defense in next year's draft, with our first round wide receiver not playing up the snuff the way that most people would assume that he did, he leaves the door open for, if the best player available on the board, if that to be a wide receiver, he leaves the door open for that to be a reasonable decision for the decision makers of the Carolina Panthers to make, because his lackluster play through his rookie season. And that's just fair to say of his play, no matter what, man. And another thing is, I am getting sick and tired of pre-draft comparisons, and I believe that Xavier Legette is yet another victim of pre-draft comparisons. And it's funny that this guy is who this guy is compared to has been the archetype of the player that the Carolina Panthers have tried to draft for two straight years now, and it just hasn't been the case. We heard that Jonathan Mingo was going to be an AJ Brown player. That was a complete bust. We heard that this guy, Xavier Legette, could potentially be an AJ Brown type receiver, and that's not the case. But the most atrocious thing that people said was the fact that this guy could be a Deebo Samuel type guy. He is not that shifty whatsoever. I don't care about top end speed. He does not have the twitchiness or the shiftiness to be compared to the likes of a guy like Deebo Samuel. He is a big bodied guy that can go up and catch 50-50 balls that he honestly doesn't even get the opportunity to catch. But he is not a Deebo Samuel guy. I believe a lot of people just say that because he also was a Gamecock, man. But that's just simply not the case. But one of the most damning things about Xavier Legette that I feel is fair to say is, with this guy being honestly a 1 year wonder in college, somebody that didn't pop into his 5th year of eligibility, playing 4 years and being a relatively unknown guy, except for those that follow the SEC closely, until he popped in his 5th season, jumped up all of these draft boards because of just how dominant he was with the extra afforded COVID season. It's scary to know that you pop for 1 year and then you get to the NFL and you make mistakes that you weren't even making when you were in college. If you are progressing so swiftly, it's scary to think that you could regress because you haven't shown any there's no consistent sign of you being able to grow the way that you did in your 1 year of college at South Carolina. That 1 year is an anomaly compared to every other year of football that you've ever played. So when you get to the NFL and you're unable to do the fundamental things that you were able to do in the ascension of your season that you became a star at South Carolina, that is scary, and it gives me cause to pause in terms of what I can hope to expect for Xavier in the future, man. But those are the negatives that I have. I believe, of course, there are more positives, there are more negatives, man. But what do you all think? I don't have a concrete answer for you all, man. I just think there's some good, there's some bad. But is this a good or bad thing? Is this a good or bad problem for the Carolina Panthers to have a first round wide receiver being outperformed by an undrafted guy? Is this a glass half full or half empty thing? That should we say that it's amazing that we can find a guy in undrafted free agency that can play this well, or do we look at it as our first round guy is getting outperformed by an undrafted guy? Whatever you all think, leave your comments down in the comment section. I'll be sure to try to get back to you then. But until next time, I am Jamario Rashad. This is the way I see it, and I'm out. Peace.